What happens when the most powerful men in the world begin to crack? When secrets, lies, and treacheries collide, the truth always emerges. The world knows Hitler's name, but it's his inner circle that harbors the darkest stories. Behind the war, beyond the speeches, and hidden in the shadows, these are the stories you were never meant to hear. In the early days of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler didn't just attract followers, he created a web of loyalty that would entangle some of the most dangerous men and women in history. These figures weren't simply his subordinates, they were his inner circle, his family, his confidants, and his most trusted allies. Joseph Goebbels, the master of Nazi propaganda, was among the first to see in Hitler something greater than just a politician. He saw a charismatic figure capable of uniting a broken Germany under a single vision. Goebbels wasn't just a political strategist, he was a man obsessed with creating an image. With each speech Hitler delivered, Goebbels carefully crafted the narrative that would cement the Führer's place in history. His ruthless manipulation of media turned Hitler into more than a man. It turned him into a godlike figure, unassailable in the public's eye. But Goebbels wasn't alone. There was Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe commander, who rose to power as Hitler's right-hand man, a figure of immense ambition. His charisma and confidence mirrored Hitler's own, but his personal greed and lust for power eventually became his undoing. In the early days, Göring was the golden boy, capturing the public's eye and even capturing the loyalty of some of Hitler's most devoted followers. But there were cracks that only a few could see. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, saw power where others saw military strategy. While Hitler's forces conquered Europe, Himmler expanded his own empire within the Nazi state, focusing on the brutal enforcement of Nazi ideology. The SS under Himmler became the backbone of Hitler's vision for a new world order. Yet even Himmler knew that power came at a price, one that would eventually cost him everything. At the heart of Hitler's inner circle, though, was Eva Braun, the woman who remained in the shadows. For years, Eva lived a life mostly unseen by the public, a figure of tragic devotion. She was more than just Hitler's lover. She was the woman who tolerated his moods, his obsessions, and his growing madness. Despite the world burning around them, Eva's loyalty never wavered. And yet, the darkness she shared with him would end in one of the most chilling moments in history. When she stood beside him in his final hours, a symbol of devotion so deep it transcended even the horror they had helped create. As Hitler rose to power, these individuals, along with others like Martin Bormann, Hitler's enigmatic personal secretary, and Rudolf Hess, the man who would attempt an escape to Britain in the midst of war, created a tight-knit inner circle that believed itself untouchable. Yet, despite the loyalty they showed, a deeper question remained. What drove them to follow a man whose ambitions seemed to destroy everything in his wake? But the darker truth lies in the people who knew the true cost of loyalty, the ones who were forced to sacrifice everything, even their own humanity, in service of the man who would take Germany to the brink of annihilation. As the war raged on and the Nazi regime continued to expand its power across Europe, the bonds within Hitler's inner circle began to fray. The loyalty that once seemed unbreakable slowly began to crack under the weight of ambition, fear, and the mounting consequences of the war. At the forefront of this growing tension was Joseph Goebbels, whose unwavering loyalty to Hitler was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. As the war took a darker turn, Goebbels increasingly saw Hitler not just as a leader, but as a deity. His propaganda machine, which had once elevated Hitler to a godlike status, now faced a growing challenge. How could they maintain the illusion of invincibility when the Reich was crumbling? Despite the growing desperation, Goebbels remained loyal, and his public speeches grew more fanatical, masking the cracks in the regime's foundation. But behind the scenes, Goebbels knew something others did not. Hitler was changing. The Führer, once a strategic mastermind, was increasingly making erratic decisions. His obsession with holding onto power, no matter the cost, led him to alienate even those closest to him. It wasn't just the tide of war that was threatening to undo everything. It was the realization that Hitler's plans were doomed to fail. Hermann Göring saw it differently. As the war escalated, he became convinced that his own vision for Nazi Germany was far superior to Hitler's. Göring, with his wealth and air of superiority, had already begun to take on the persona of a future leader. But his relationship with Hitler, once one of friendship and loyalty, began to sour as Göring started to see himself as the rightful heir to the Third Reich. This internal conflict came to a head in 1944, when Göring, desperate to secure power for himself, made a bold move. He attempted to negotiate with the Allies. In his mind, a Nazi Germany under his leadership could be saved, but the war would need to end soon. His betrayal was nothing less than an act of treason in the eyes of the Führer. But Hitler, in his paranoid delusions, dismissed Göring as a traitor, and their relationship soured beyond repair. While the struggle for power raged within the upper echelons of the Nazi regime, the situation within the SS was no less volatile. Heinrich Himmler, once a fiercely loyal servant to Hitler, found himself increasingly at odds with the direction of the war. Himmler, driven by his own beliefs in the supremacy of the SS, began to seek out ways to distance himself from Hitler's deteriorating leadership. He began negotiating with the Allies, secretly attempting to secure peace deals, thinking that he could salvage a piece of Nazi Germany for himself. But Himmler's betrayal would not go unnoticed. Hitler's paranoia knew no bounds, and Himmler was soon dismissed from his position as head of the SS. His ambitions, like those of Göring, were ultimately his undoing. Yet, amidst the conflict between the men, one woman's loyalty remained untouched. Eva Braun, hidden in the background throughout the chaos of the war, remained by Hitler's side. Her loyalty, which had once seemed blind, became a source of discomfort for many. Despite the unraveling of the Nazi regime, Eva stayed close to Hitler, keeping the appearance of a perfect relationship as the world collapsed around them. As the Reich fell, her fate became inextricably linked to Hitler's, and their joint end would seal the tragic story of Hitler's inner circle. As the war entered its final, most desperate stages, the cracks within Hitler's inner circle became impossible to ignore. The invincible aura that had once surrounded the Nazi leadership had begun to fade, replaced by fear, paranoia, and deep divisions among those who had once pledged unwavering loyalty to the Führer. By 1944, it was clear to all but the most deluded within Hitler's inner circle that the war was lost. The Allies had pushed into France, the Soviet Union had recaptured vast territories, and Germany was reeling from constant airstrikes. Yet, instead of seeking peace or surrender, Hitler clung to his vision, a vision that demanded total domination, even as it crumbled around him. Joseph Goebbels, ever the loyalist, continued to spin lies for the German people, even as the Allies drew closer. But Goebbels was not blind. He saw the truth behind the scenes. His personal life became a tragic reflection of the regime's descent. As Hitler's mental state deteriorated, Goebbels' desperation grew. Despite the dire circumstances, he remained Hitler's most fervent supporter, choosing to die alongside his children rather than accept defeat. His fate mirrored the tragic finality of the Nazi regime, loyalty to the end even as the world collapsed. But Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler were already looking to the future. Göring, emboldened by his perceived legitimacy and high rank, tried to take control in the final days of the war. His offer to negotiate peace with the Allies was an act of desperation, an attempt to secure a future for himself beyond the ruins of the Third Reich. When he declared himself Hitler's successor in 1944, Hitler reacted with fury, and the bond between the two men shattered. Göring's betrayal in the eyes of Hitler sealed his fate. He was arrested and imprisoned. His final days were marked by disgrace, betrayal, and an ignominious fall from grace. Meanwhile, Heinrich Himmler, whose obsession with the SS and Aryan purity was unmatched, took his ambitions even further. In a shocking move, Himmler secretly attempted to negotiate peace with the Allies, hoping to secure a post-war position for himself. This treasonous act was a bitter betrayal of Hitler's vision and led to Himmler's eventual dismissal from his position as the head of the SS. Himmler's pursuit of self-preservation and his desperate attempts to forge deals with the Allies would haunt him until the very end. In the final days, Himmler was captured by British forces while attempting to escape. His suicide, just days before the war ended, marked the tragic and cowardly end of one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. But amidst this chaos, Eva Braun remained, standing by Hitler's side as the walls of the Führerbunker closed in. For years, she had been a silent observer, a figure who had lived in the shadows of power. As the war crumbled, she remained in the bunker, devoted to Hitler, just as she had been for over a decade. In April 1945, as the Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Braun's loyalty reached its tragic peak. She married Hitler in the Führerbunker, just hours before they both took their lives in a double suicide. In that moment, Hitler's inner circle, once so full of hope and ambition, was reduced to mere shadows. Loyalty and betrayal intertwined in one final, irreversible act. As the war reached its bloody conclusion, the world watched as the Nazi regime, once feared and powerful, disintegrated in a catastrophic collapse. For Adolf Hitler, the man who had ruled over Europe with iron fists, there was no escape from the reality of his failure. Inside the Führerbunker, the final chapter was written, not just for Hitler, but for his closest followers as well. On April 30th, 1945, as the Soviet forces encircled Berlin, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives. The dictator, who had once dreamed of world domination and a 1,000-year Reich, was reduced to a broken man, hiding in a bunker, his world crumbling around him. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's most loyal supporter, did not falter in his devotion. In the face of defeat, Goebbels remained obsessed with the Führer and the Nazi ideology. The German people, already ravaged by the war, were fed one final dose of propaganda. And Goebbels, alongside his wife Magda, made the ultimate decision to die with their 6 children. In an agonizingly tragic moment, Goebbels poisoned his children before turning the poison on himself and his wife. His death symbolized the insane loyalty and fanaticism that had consumed him. It was a bitter end, but Goebbels never wavered from his belief in the Nazi cause. But Hermann Göring, once Hitler's most trusted ally, met a different fate. The once proud Luftwaffe commander was arrested by Allied forces and brought to trial. In the end, his attempt to negotiate peace and secure his own power came to nothing. As he sat in prison awaiting his trial, Göring's shame was palpable. His greed, lust for power, and betrayal of Hitler left him isolated and humiliated. He committed suicide in his cell on the eve of his execution, a final act of cowardice from a man who had once ruled with such confidence. The fall of Göring marked the last of the top Nazi figures to die without achieving the glory they had once promised themselves. Heinrich Himmler, whose fate had been sealed by his secret peace negotiations with the Allies, was captured as he tried to escape. His desperate attempts to save his life were futile, and when the truth of his betrayal came to light, Himmler's disgrace was absolute. He was found dead in British custody, having taken his own life, one final cowardly act that denied him even the chance for a fair trial. And then there was Eva Braun. For over a decade, she had been Hitler's companion, hiding away in the shadows, rarely seen by the public. In their final hours, as the world outside burned, she remained by his side. Her decision to marry Hitler, just hours before their suicides, seemed to cement the tragic, devoted loyalty she had shown him throughout their relationship. Her death alongside Hitler in the Führerbunker became a haunting symbol of blind loyalty, a woman lost to history, known more for her connection to the man than for any accomplishments of her own. The legacy of Eva Braun, the woman who had remained in the shadows, was sealed in that final, tragic act. While the immediate deaths of these key figures closed the chapter on Nazi Germany, their legacy lived on in ways they could never have imagined. Martin Bormann, the architect of Hitler's inner circle, disappeared in the final days of the war. Some believe he escaped, even suggesting that he may have played a role in Nazi escape routes to South America. Others claim that he died while trying to flee Berlin. Whatever the truth, Bormann's mysterious end raised more questions than answers. But the story of Hitler's inner circle doesn't end with their deaths. In the years that followed, the world would uncover secrets, dark, hidden truths that would shake the foundations of history itself. Some of these secrets would come to light in shocking and unexpected ways, revealing that the legacy of the Nazi inner circle was far from over. The truth about what happened to those who vanished in the final days of the war, and what some of them may have been planning all along, is a story still waiting to be told. What happened to the remaining leaders of the Reich, and what lies hidden in the shadows of history that could alter everything we know about World War II? The answers are buried deep, and they're waiting to be uncovered.